Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Tuesday edition of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am John Hickman, and thank you for making the Locked On Texans a part of your daily listen and rotation. We are free and available on all platforms. I am joined by my co-host, Cody Davis, here to talk more of the Houston Texans. And as you can see, as I mentioned on yesterday's show, I am not behind the yellow brick wall here. I'm on vacation, but Cody, give the folks that rundown and let's take them down that yellow brick road.
Yes, sir. And on this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans, John and I are going to look at Kamu Grugier Hill and talk about the possibility of him being one of the few guys that actually going to stick around here with the Houston Texans beyond the 2021 season. And then we're going to close out this latest installment of Locked On Texans with a very interesting tweet that I saw. Somebody is really trying to make the argument to say whether or not Tyrod Taylor is the third best quarterback in Texans franchise history. So John and I are actually going to have a little fun with that debate. But to kick this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans kicked off, John, listeners, viewers, as we know, the Houston Texans possibly arguably had one of the biggest upset of the 2021 season in the NFL by defeating the Tennessee Titans 22-13 on Sunday. And with that win, the Houston Texans improved to 2-8 on the season. However, the Texans did kind of hurt their draft stock just a little bit because by defeating the Tennessee Titans on Sunday, if the draft was held this weekend, the Houston Texans will actually hold the 4th overall pick instead of the 2nd pick. Now, John, I want to look at this from a standpoint of whether or not this is a big deal for the Texans, because I'm looking at this from a standpoint of, one, it's not that big of a deal because when you take a look at the college prospects who are coming out of this year's draft, I do not see a defined generational talent at any position. I know there's Kayvon Thibodeau, but I'm not too sure outside of him is there anyone else worth the Houston Texans tanking for. And two, there is a possibility that the Texans can also hinder their draft stock because look, the New York Jets, they're coming inside NRG Stadium with the same 2-8 record as the Houston Texans, and the Texans are coming off a win. The Jets, they're continuously losing as always. There's a great possibility that they can actually make it 2 wins in a row, which means if they win on Sunday, they will actually fall outside of the top 5, but they will still be in the top 10. And John, I'm thinking if the Texans can get, let's say, 1 or 2 more wins, that can actually put them in a position where they can actually draft at a position where they definitely need talent, and that position is at cornerback if they fall somewhere, let's say between the 6 and 10 draft slot.
So let me get this right. You're saying that it's not a big deal that they're picking 4th instead of 2nd.
Yes.
And
if they win on Sunday, then, if that draft stock continues to fall, I mean, as long as they stay in the top 10, that would give them an opportunity to draft at a position that they definitely need, especially at cornerbacks, taking, let's say one of the top cornerbacks, let's say at pick number 8 or 9.
But you also feel like there's not a generational talent outside of Thibodeau in that top 5 range that's projected?
At least in my opinion.
Okay, so I agree that it's not a big deal that Houston isn't picking 2nd, or, they're not in the race right now to pick 1st. I think Detroit may lock that in, actually.
Oh, yeah. They already got that locked.
Right. I don't think it's a big deal, but I think that's the right choice, the wrong way of going about it in a sense. I think that there are talents coming out aside of Thibodeau. I like Neal, the right tackle from Alabama. I think that in Houston's case, there isn't a generational quarterback. I think everybody can agree on that, but Houston is a team that has so many different needs that they're not a quarterback away. Some of these franchises, they're a quarterback away. When you look at what the Chargers did a couple of years ago when they went out and drafted Herbert, they were a franchise that was a young quarterback away. Some of these franchises are like that. Houston's not in that position because that quarterback away is getting away in Deshaun Watson. So they need a right tackle. The experiment of Howard, that has been going, south at left guard. And I don't know if Houston will put a lot of stock into him moving back to right tackle. They need a defensive tackle, I still think. And you're right, Cody. A cornerback would be huge for Houston in this upcoming year's draft. I think Houston needs so many different players and positions that to be filled. Then picking second, picking third, fourth, five, as you mentioned, top 10 is where Houston should fall, which would be the first time since Jadeveon Clowney, if I'm not mistaken. But the race for number one isn't as important as the race of, taking your time and getting the right pick.
And that is where I say the Houston Texans are not doing themselves a disservice by continuing winning. Because look, if they are, let's say, if they had the number one pick or the number two pick, I mean, we see it all the time. It's either you get this guy. It's like it's almost like franchises are forced to take whoever they feel is the generational talent, versus when you get somewhere, let's say in that 6 to 10 range, now you're looking at a standpoint where you can say, okay, we need a cornerback. John, to your point, we need a right tackle. We need a safety who can actually help elevate our franchise. And that is where I think Nick Caserio and the Houston Texans would be able to hit a home run in this year's draft, versus, let's say, if they're at number two, then they'd be forced to take the second best prospect off the board.
Also, I would make the case that like this franchise has fallen from grace fast and hard, right? And I would make the case for a franchise that had the world at their fingertips a couple of seasons ago. Do you really want that number one pick? Like, wouldn't that be more of a slap in the face to show where you came from, where you had Watson, Watt, Hopkins, a very decent, I would say a decent assault line in the last couple of years, a very active defense when you had a healthy Watt, Clowney, you had Justin Reed, Tashawn Gibson. You had a great team put together, and you saw you were at the mountaintop. But then now, a couple of years later, I'm picking second, possibly first in this year's draft. I think that'll be more of like one of those. Like another reminder, how did we get here? Now, of course, you got here because you're just a bad franchise right now. But for Houston, I would say losing in the draft instead of strengthening themselves in the draft, I don't think that's a big deal because, Bryce Young isn't coming out this year. A lot of these highly, like Stroud out of Ohio State, a lot of these big name quarterbacks, generational as of right now while they're in college, quarterbacks aren't coming out. And it's not like you're the Jacksonville Jaguars or the New York Jets of last year. You got time to get to that point. So pick the right players right down. That way, whenever it's time, you're actually a quarterback away and not a quarterback and somebody to protect them and somebody to get other opposing offenses off the field as well. The Locked On Texans, your first listen every day. We are free and available on all major podcasting platforms.
And continuing here with this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans, John and I want to take a look at a player who has a great possibility of returning and actually having a great possibility to be a part of the Houston Texans rebuild. Now, we know during the offseason, Nick Caserio signed a number of players to one-year deals. And one of those players who signed a one-year contract was Kamu Grugier Hill. And John, I don't know if you will agree or disagree with me or not, but I can definitely see Hill coming back and actually being part of the Houston Texans rebuild, because Hill, going back to Sunday's game, he was arguably the second, no lower than the third most important Texan to take the field during that win against the Tennessee Titans, because he had made not one, but two great defensive plays in the win that the Texans got over the Tennessee Titans. As we all know, he recorded an 82-yard interception, and then him alongside Justin Reed had an opportunity to stop Adrian Peterson on that fourth down, and both of those defensive plays that Hill made in that win on Sunday was part of the reason why the Houston Texans were able to get the momentum early, keep the momentum, and he also helped that team go up 12-0 at the halftime break. And I don't want to talk about this just based off of his performance on Sunday, but when you take a look at what Hill means to this organization as a whole, from how good he was playing, even when you take away the game against the Titans, this is a guy that has been a reliable player in the linebacking core. And not only that, this is a guy, and John, I know you hate this, he is the perfect example of the quote unquote culture fit for the Houston Texans. Now, John, before I give the floor back over to you, I want you guys just to take a quick listen to the exchange that I had with David Culley about Kamu Grugier Hill. Coach, yesterday Kamu Grugier Hill had one of his best games of the season, but can you just talk about how important he has been to this team throughout the season?
Well, she talked about leadership, Kristen, earlier. Listen, he's one of those guys. Plays every snap. Not only does he play all the snaps, he plays on special teams for us, and he's a pro. You know, he and Tyrod, he's kind of like our Tyrod on defense. With Kristen Kersey not being out, he stepped up and kind of taken that role, and he's done a heck of a job with it. And again, playing as much as he's playing, and his leadership, like I said before, he does a great job.
What stuck out to me, Cody, was your head coach calling you the Tyrod Taylor of the defense. And I'll tell you why that's even more important. Because the Houston Texans are 2-2 with Tyrod Taylor. They are defeated with somebody else at quarterback in Davis Mills, right? But so that just shows you, number one, how important Tyrod Taylor is to this for this team's success. But number two, I just think it's funny that they're calling him the Tyrod Taylor of the defense and not Cunningham. And Cunningham has been playing well. He played well on Sunday, and I thought he played fairly decent the week before. But also with Hill, since since the Buffalo game, so week 4, he's played in 85, 100, 100, 100, 73, 96, 91. Those are the percentages, the defensive snap percentages that he's played. So he's been on that field. Also on special teams throughout this year, he's played on special teams over 40% 3 times, and as a starting linebacker. He's also one of those players at that linebacker position that has filled holes very well for Houston and has been able to kind of get into the backfield to be disruptive. Hill has been very important for this team, and there's no denying that when Houston looks around next year, when they're assessing their free agents, who they have on their roster that will be free agents, who they want to bring in, I think right in the middle of bringing in and don't want to let go and keeping rather would be Hill. He's played well this year in his role, and at times, majority of the time, he has been the best linebacker for Houston on the field. Christian Kirksey has been out. Joe Thomas hasn't, been as available as we probably like for him to be, and the roles and back and forth with Zach Cunningham, whether he's playing or not getting any snaps or that whole drama. The consistent linebacker so far this year, Texan fans, has been Hill. And he's a player that I believe, out of the few 1 or 2 year contracts that was signed and brought in, he's one of those players where you got to bring him back. I think so. Now, of course, he may be auditioning for another team, and that happens for Houston. Like they bring in players, and that player plays well, and then the next season they're somewhere else. They can't afford him, or the player wants to move on. So he may be very well operating and auditioning for another team, but I think he's a player that Houston should have high on their list, bring him back for next year. And in his case, I'm not mad that he's a culture guy. I'm not mad. It makes sense. He's a player that, in fairness, he's been bounced around the league. Hasn't been a big name linebacker. And so they brought him in. He fits what they're attempting, whatever the case is, trying to do with that culture, but he's playing well. In the past, Houston would have culture guys that they'd bring back, but they're not playing well. They're not really giving you anything on whatever side of the ball that they're playing on. He is a player that's giving you everything, and he's also a good fit for your locker room. So I'm one of those guys that want to bring him back. I want to see him in the Texan jersey for at least another couple of years. Ladies and gentlemen, this week is Thanksgiving, and we all know what that means. Football, and nothing goes better with football than turkey and betting. BetOnline has you covered all holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all of the sports action this Thanksgiving. Head to our new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up and receive your 50% welcome bonus with a promo code locked on to receive your bonus. Excuse me. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports because BetOnline is stuffed with deals this Thanksgiving.
All righty, ladies and gentlemen, before we close out this Tuesday installment of Locked On Texans, John, it's been so long since the Houston Texans won a game. Sometimes I feel like people just don't know how to act. There were so many funny tweets. There were so many funny memes about the Texans winning. But the one that actually caught my eye came from a guy by the name of Ross Valaro. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his last name right. But his Twitter handle is SportsRV. And he tweeted that Tyrod Taylor is a top 3 quarterback in Texans history. A tweet that is way out there. But the funny part about that tweet, when you go into the comment section, there was people actually debating whether or not Tyrod Taylor is a top 3 quarterback. You got in the comment in franchise history. Look, ladies and gentlemen, John, what I would say is based off of name recognition, Tyrod Taylor is what? Number 2, based off of name recognition. But just because a guy is, John, earlier in the show, you said he's 2-2. I'm going to say he's 2-1 because he didn't finish that game against the Cleveland Browns. But just because a guy is 2-1, and he was kind of like I don't want to say a savior, but somebody that actually tried his hardest to get the Houston Texans out of football hell after what this organization had put them throughout the offseason. It is way too early to call Taylor a top 3 quarterback in franchise history. First and foremost, number 1, unfortunately, is up for grabs now because
no, it's not.
Yes,
no,
it is. John, come on now. No, you know what? I'm gonna let you take. Who is number 1 in your book?
Number 1 is Deshaun Watson,
but he hasn't been here long enough. He hasn't been here long enough.
It doesn't matter. It literally does not matter.
And who would be number 2 in your book?
Number 2 is Matt Schaub.
And to be honest with you, we can interchange that because when you go back and you take a look at the history books, Matt Schaub still holds the majority of the quarterback's records. Yes, Deshaun Watson
has a playoff win. I don't think he does. I think it was TJ Yates.
He wasn't a quarterback when the Texans
TJ Yates won a game and then they got beat out.
But he wasn't a quarterback when the Texans beat I think that was the Bengals. The Bengals that year?
TJ Yates.
Okay.
TJ Yates.
Deshaun Watson,
one of them years,
number
I think,
1.
was Fitzpatrick, who's entered the chat as well. I don't think Tyrod Taylor I don't think he's going to be a number 3 quarterback. I mean,
if he's still here next year,
I still don't think so. I think the top 3 is Watson, Schaub, and David Carr still.
Mm-hmm.
I think Fitzpatrick rounds out at number 4. I got laughed at. I said Brian Hoyer. He had some time in Houston, but also who else? Sage Rosenfeld would be on that list as well. Brock Osweiler took him to the playoffs.
Hell no. No, you are not about to put I'd rather Tyrod over Osweiler. Come on.
I'm sorry, man, but
what I will say, because of Brock is the reason why we had Deshaun Watson for 4 or 5 years in Houston.
So he gets another push, right? He gets another push because
does he though?
Brock's stinking it up. You wouldn't get Deshaun Watson.
But does it though? In hindsight, in 2021, it didn't pay out.
Well, I tell you what, it's not the player's fault. You go up 24-0 and then you don't close out the game. But I don't think Tyrod Taylor would ever be a top 3 Texan quarterback. I mean, his conversation is cut down 1,000 times because he only played 4 games this season. So
3.5, really.
3.5, literally.
What I would say, What I would say, this conversation that we have in one, it's kind of sad because in 20 years you have how many quarterbacks in your franchise history? But two, and most importantly, I think this is a conversation that we should revisit if Tyrod Taylor resigns with this team, because I do believe there is a slim chance that he may come back in 2022, depending on the confidence level in Davis Mills and depending on whether or not they go after a quarterback in the draft. But what I would say is if Tyrod Taylor comes back in 2022, and let's say he plays the entire season and he actually gets this team to a point where they are respected, then I could say, okay, maybe we could start having a conversation on whether or not he's number 3. But number 3 after 3.5 games, come on now, man.
Nah,
But what I would say is,
fans,
in the off season, maybe we need to bring some of the listeners on here. We should really have a real conversation on whether or not it's fair to say that Deshaun Watson is the best quarterback in franchise history. Talent-wise, yes.
Interesting.
But
I think that'll be interesting. I think one thing you got to look at with Schaub is Schaub had the greatest Texan team in franchise history. Two years he did. And it was clearly him holding them back. Whether it had been injury that one year where they went 12-4. And I do think that if he doesn't get hurt, then there's a different discussion about where Schaub may end up because that's how good that team was. But, Schaub fumbled what Houston could possibly be in regards of the greatness of that early 2010 team. I think so. Deshaun is Deshaun in his situation. And, but one thing about Deshaun is he's put up great numbers, had great moments, got 2 playoff wins with a team that had a lot of dysfunction going on.
Well,
and Tyrod isn't better than Carr, Fitzpatrick, Hoyer. And I'm going to say Brock Osweiler. I don't care.
Well,
He stunk.
You talk about the Texans in the early 2010s, all I'm going to say is, it's good for them because they should have drafted Vince Young when they had an opportunity to. And it would have saved the Texans and it would have saved Vince Young's career. That's all I got to say. That's good for them. And we wouldn't be sitting here talking about a Deshaun or whoever the case, Tyrod Taylor. We'd be talking about Vince Young in the Hall of Fame life because it was the Texans and the Titans that ruined his career. That's all I got to say. I'm going to forever hold a grudge about that draft.
And with that being said, I'm John Hickman. You guys follow me on Twitter at John_Hickman12. Also follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans as a page. Go to YouTube, subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube at Locked On Texans as well.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody Davis. Please remember to follow me on my new Twitter account. It's going to be COTYDAVIS_10. Why 10? Because that was Vince Young jersey number. And I'm going to continue to hold a grudge against that organization that they should have drafted Vince Young. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.
This is what I deal with.